John, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm a fraud expert that's been in the field of fraud prevention, both in the card space as well as in scam and general financial crime fraud prevention for about 20 years. I've worked as an industry analyst for a firm that works primarily with banks and credit unions and other corporate entities. But I've also worked a lot with consumers around education and spent a fair amount of time in the credit union and banking space as well.
It's nice that you have kind of see both sides of the equation.
It's very helpful.
And I'm sure the consumers appreciate that as well.
Well, consumers need every edge, and being a consumer yourself and me as well, there's just no end to the nuances and changes that we're seeing. As we advance our society, we're sort of also allowing criminals to advance their attack on us. So I think, we all need to probably ratchet up on the communication a little bit and come to some mutual understanding on how to sort of curtail some of this fraud that's going on.
That sounds like we're going to solve this across the world in the next 45 minutes here.
Well, that's what we plan to do. That's our commitment. Now, whether we'll achieve that, we're not sure.
Exactly. So I'm curious. You've been in this field for 20 years. It's longer than I've been in this space.
Mhm.
What are some of I'm just kind of curious, some of the fraud and scams that you don't see anymore that was prevalent in your earlier years?
Well, we have a saying in kind of the fraud world that everything old is new again. So things do kind of come back in a cyclical fashion, but they have sort of like a digital nuance to them, if you will, time and again. So obviously, as we advance in sort of our digital habits, we're all using smartphones as an example. The text theme is always something that we see today in modern time. Prior to that, though, you've always heard of like the flim flam man or the confidence guy. A lot of the things that started out very early, pre 1980s, it had to be kind of a face to face or voice call scenario. Literally, there was so much more physicality to scams and fraud that we saw before. At one point, you could rob a bank or steal from your employer, and that was financial crime at the time. But as we started to really get into the world of ATM cards, diners club cards, MasterCard and Visa, we really started to take these really interesting technological leaps that have kind of placed us in this spot today where we have all this enormous convenience, but there's also a price to pay for that if we're not keeping our eye completely centered and being conscious of what's happening around us too. So, that's part of the issue, I think. But yeah, I think scams just keep coming back around. They have new wrinkles.
Is that part of the challenge, at least from the banking side, is balancing the convenience and safety for the consumer?
There are more conversations going on about balancing acts, and we love to talk about having a friction-free world for our consumers. So I think that if we can do anything to put a little balm on the angry souls of consumers that have tried to reach their financial institution, or perhaps they tried to log in today and had some problems that we would call friction, we obsess over it. There really is this honest effort to try to make things easier for the consumer, but still sift out and keep the bad guys out. That's pretty tough, actually. The first person that's going to try and figure you out is a criminal.
Yeah.
They're going to synthesize you as much as possible. So that's a big challenge.
So let's talk. Let's go to the consumer side because that's
Sure.
predominantly who we're talking to today.
Mhm.
So what are the let's work through some of the top things that consumers need to be watching out for.
Well, I think for one thing, if you want to keep in mind the best point of view that I try to have with my own personal finances is a mantra I use all the time. if I don't care about them, how could I possibly expect anybody else to care as much or more than I do? So I really have invested a lot of time in how can I sort of automate myself a little bit and have more than just one set of eyes on things. And so I'm always very conscious of looking at places where I bank, any place where there's a purchase, like an Amazon type scenario, a Walmart, an Instacart, even all the things that people are embracing right now. We need to make sure that we're alerting ourselves to any activity that's going on. And we so seldom take the time. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, you need some self care. Well, your finances need self care as well. So, you either set aside once a week 30 minutes to really take a look at the things that are important to you, or you try to set up some passive alerting so that you can see what your balance is every day in your checking account, which is something that I've done for a zillion years. I don't think that consumers realize that just a simple call into the bank or the credit union or to your investment company, ask them what they have for you. You probably would be surprised in most cases. If you're incredibly disappointed, maybe it's time to look for a better digital experience elsewhere. They're not all the same. But being able to kind of create that environment where if somebody takes out more than 50 or $100 from an ATM machine, as an example, I want to know about that because that's not the way I roll.
Yeah.
I'm a $20 cash back at the grocery store kind of person. So, strangely, $100 is a lot of money to me through the ATM, as an example. So I get a little pop up that says, "Did you just do that?" And yes, I giggle and grin whenever I go on vacation and I've taken out a lot of money, and I get the little pop up, and I'm like, "Yes, it's working." So there is validation there, but I think that's one of the big secrets for consumers. They really need to kind of lean into that.
Yeah, definitely one of the alerts I have also set up with, even though I travel internationally from time to
Mhm.
time, I have an alert set up for any international transaction. Send me a text message,
Mhm.
send me an email, and alert me in the app. Because to me, that's
Absolutely.
just one of those big red flags is I know whether I'm international or not.
You should know that, and I think you need to kind of understand too that there's probably some things that maybe you'll never use. And so for people that just, there are folks out there that just have zero interest in establishing a digital account. So they don't want to register for something. But here's the other side of that coin. So you don't want to do it, but do you want a criminal to register on your behalf? The answer is no. So I think the option with something like that, you either have to call up and ask them to permanently, if they can do it, block access for digital avenues, or you might just have to begrudgingly register with a secure password and claim an account before a criminal can do it. I'm a big fan. I don't know. Are you an app user on smartphones? Do you rely on those for transactions and traveling and things like that?
Uh,
I mean, I do.
yes and no. There are
Hmm.
certain things I'm perfectly happy doing on the phone, on my phone, and there's other things that I'm less comfortable doing on my phone.
Sure. I think everyone is in a different place with that. What I really like about, and I'll say legitimate, the proviso is legitimate apps that you obtain from the App Store rather than, um, heaven forbid, Facebook or
Yeah.
some weird website where you're going to get a fake one. Are push notifications. It's a great way to be able to quickly get into your account, but also to see some passive alerting and things. Whether it's, I even get alerted when deposits are put into my account because my fear is, you asked earlier about like old scams that are new.
Yeah.
The check deposit kiting scam that people used to run all the time, where they would try to, put a lot of fake checks into an account. When the balance would balloon appropriately, then they would sort of do a grab and run and take the
Mhm.
funds out. I want to know when money's traveling into my account if it's not my money. And so
Yeah.
that's one of my sort of, motivations, I think, as well for that.
Yeah, and I think so. I've known a few people in my life who something has legitimately accidentally gotten deposited in their account,
Hmm.
and they had the moral dilemma of do I want to let the bank know that something was incorrectly deposited in my account? I'm like,
Sure.
you definitely want to let them know, because
You
what you
should.
don't want to happen is you spend it, then they realize it ain't your money. They're going to take it back out.
It's going to be backed out of your account as soon as possible. That's the rub with that. But I think it's probably the smart guy's going to report it as soon as possible and just get it off the books. And if you share an account, the last thing you want is your significant other to say, "Wow, we have two extra $1,000 to spend. I'm totally going for it." That would be a difficult conversation to have this evening over the dinner table. So yeah, report that.
I just booked airline tickets, honey.
No, you don't have to worry. I've bought my own birthday present, and it's a doozy. So thank you in advance.
Yeah, I haven't thought about, the. I think alerts and deposits is probably not one that I have enabled, but I think because of that, I think you have a good point of that's one that I do need to enable.
Sure. I'm curious if you have ever either you've done this or you've contemplated. What about your general credit in particular? Like for me, early on, as soon as there were free credit freezes through the bureaus, I immediately sat down and spent half an hour freezing my credit because I don't want anybody else to use it. I mean, I'm not using it, but I don't want anyone else to. And
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious what your viewpoint is on that, if you've done it or
Um,
if you know much about it.
I'm trying to think of how long ago that I did that. Um, I think when I did it, it was some of the credit bureaus actually charged you to freeze your credit. It was before the
Hmm.
government said, no, 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 you can't charge people for that. I think that's
Right.
right around the time, just before the government said, no, you can't charge for that, was when I started to freeze my credit. I don't think that anything happened uh, that made me like go, oh my gosh. But I think we had just recently purchased a house at that point, and
Hmm.
I wasn't expecting any more any credit, new lines of credit to be opened. And I was starting to get worried about, well, gosh, we have assets now. I don't need weird things to be happening. Let me just freeze everything.
Sure.
And my gosh, it's been a real pain when I've tried to when I've here's the funny story
Hmm.
of how credit is so ingrained into life. We went to buy a car and we had the cash to buy it and perfectly happy to write a check. The place that I was buying the car was, well, we still need to run your credit, even if you're giving us a check. Because if the check bounce, we want to know that it's kind of, we want to have the idea whether or not your check is going to bounce.
Well, here's a novel idea. Why don't you call the bank and find out? But that's
and,
just me.
and that's what I did. I'm like, you can call the bank, or I'm perfectly fine letting the check clear and then I'll come back and pick up the car. I just don't want to deal
Yes.
with the hassle. And ultimately, it was such a, they were, it was a good deal. It was the perfect vehicle. And they basically said, no, this is just the way that we do things. And so okay, well, what credit bureau are you going to run? Okay, I got to go home and find that 14-digit passcode to unfreeze my
Sure.
credit.
Yeah.
And so it's almost been this, okay, I really like the fact the freezing the credit because no one can open an account without, you know, really jumping through hoops.
Hmm.
But there's so much at least at the time, I don't think it's nearly as bad now. There was so much friction at the time that it really made me rethink, do I really want to do this? Because it was the time where you couldn't just go onto the website, type something in.
Sure.
You had to have that 14-digit PIN code in order to
Yes.
unfreeze it, or you had to wait 2 weeks. I don't know. It was something ridiculous. I don't remember the
Yeah.
scenario, but
Yeah. They've ironed it out quite a bit, and you'd
yeah.
be pleased. I think one of the if I were giving advice to anybody, I think one of the things that I would do is load the apps to your smart device or onto your laptop for the bureaus that offer them. At least the last time I did it, two out of the three major bureaus had an app you could put on your phone, which is really super helpful.
Hmm.
But then when I established everything, I did use my laptop to just set everything up initially, because it's nice to be able to see a big
Yeah.
screen in that one instance. And I so seldom use a laptop for much other than work. But the thing that I like about it, it's an easy click on, click off scenario with the app.
Yeah.
So that, if you find yourself, trying to make a purchase. And I've been faced with that dilemma too, where they'll say, we'll give you an extra $200 off the sofa, if you open up the department store credit card, which I do not want. But $200 is $200. And so you have to say, well, give me a minute. I'm going to turn this off, and then we'll go through this little charade here. But it's worth it. What I find troubling about this world is the fact that a criminal can easily walk into a cellular store today, walk out with thousands of dollars worth of equipment and other things in your name, and they're
Yeah.
off and gone, and then you have to explain that it wasn't you. And I think it's a shame that legitimate victims have to spend so much time explaining why it wasn't them.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of a proponent of that for people that are willing to take the time and do it.
Are you a fan of credit cards and banks that allow you to freeze the credit card, not freeze your credit, but kind of disable the credit card, so you just enable it when you're going to do a transaction and then turn it around and disable it? Are you a fan of like that sort of technology?
Well, I mean, I used to be a big fan with it. I think it's like anything else. As long as it works, as long as the mainframes and everything that govern it work, and you can use it. It's another one of those things where, are you standing in line somewhere where you want to buy something,
Yeah.
and you have to empower it. But I love the idea that you can say, I'm never going to a jewelry store or a fur store or an electronics store in my life. I'm going to partition those and not allow them. I like that capability through some of those products. I think, why not? I mean, I laugh because I call it the triangle of my life, which
Hmm.
is the big box retailer down the street, the grocery store, and the gas station. And if I come up missing and you can't find me inside the triangle, I'm probably never going to be found, because that's where I typically am going, within 5 miles of my house. So
My
yeah.
wife and I, we always joke, "Oh my gosh, we ate outside our little 5 mile bubble."
And then your favorite places start calling you and saying, "Is everything okay? Because our net sales went down last month, and we haven't seen you in a while." Yeah, I often think about that.
I think that's unfortunately true in at least one or two cases.
Oh, it has to be. I mean, I would be embarrassed to know that probably most of the people say, "Oh, that's the fried rice guy, but no egg in it." They probably know my order before I place it, because it's just we get to be a creature of habit sometimes. And
There was a sushi place that unfortunately has now closed. That during the pandemic, we really wanted. They were just doing takeout during the pandemic, and so we'd call and start placing the order. And I'd get about halfway through the order, and she'd go, "Oh, Chris, do you want?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah."
yes, I do. I am the sad man that calls once a week to feed his family, but we all do that. It was interesting to me to see from sort of like an evolutionary state with the restaurants. I mean, they really evolved quickly with um, some pretty slick order on the fly kind of setups. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've noticed, just like, I mean, forgive me for saying the hole in the wall, because I go to plenty of those, but I'm just so impressed when I pull up, a GPS, and I'm like, find the local whatever. And the pizza joint has a better digital experience than my bank has. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. It's interesting.
It really has been interesting to see see how the differences between various businesses have pivoted
Hmm.
uh, and really have put into play some really interesting technical solutions to a
Hmm.
non-technical problem at the time. There's a place that I go that it's all kiosk ordering. You go up and you order it online, or you order on the kiosk, and
Sure.
they just bring the food out to you. There's no cash register. There's nobody up at the front anymore.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, like, then you've got the banks that, like, nope, this is the way we're going to do things, and we're going to be really, really slow to change.
Sure. It's interesting when you're slow to change. Sometimes you're the first to go out of business, and that's a
Yeah.
good message to kind of convey to people. There are a lot of really great things, though, that I think most of us now. I work in this stuff, so obviously I can nerd out about it and I can use it and be enthusiastic. But I think that for Joe and Barbara consumer out there, some of the things that they're missing the point on could keep them a lot safer too in the space of just how we transact every day. And one of them, I think we've had sort of a tap and go revolution.
Yeah.
During COVID and then after, I think people are really comfortable because, going through that, don't touch anybody or anything if you can help it. It really propelled the contactless experience. But
Yeah.
I think that we forget consumers aren't thinking about it as a highly secure, fully encrypted way to pay, and that's what it actually is. But also at the gas pump, if you see a little NFC, a little cloudy black box on a gas pump, rather than dipping your payment card into the gas pump and maybe getting it skimmed, you can have a fully automated contactless tap and go right there. High encryption, super, super safe. Same thing with people who have been reluctant with the pays that are out there. So like Apple Pay.
Yeah.
I know that's something that just started at such a Neolithic glacial pace. They were tracking it there for a while and they said, well, it's just, young men that like to push buttons of a certain age and demographic that are using it and nobody else is using it. Well, I didn't really love it a whole lot either, but I have to say now, just like with eBay and PayPal, how it's really grown and ingrained in everybody's
Yeah.
worlds, Apple Pay is kind of like that now. You can do Uber and Apple Pay. So I find myself with like really tiny little transactions using it because I just want to do a double click and go scenario. But it's also very secure. So I think circling back to the whole thing of, being a little safer in your life, kind of tiptoe out to the edge and use some of the new sort of payment techniques and, just be a little safer. Nobody wants the nightmare of having to wait for a debit card to arrive in the mail. I don't.
Okay. Now I'll put you on the spot here, and it wasn't intentional, it wasn't planned. I've always been very curious why. Okay, so I'll ask a question, then you can explain the technology.
Okay.
Why U.S. Credit card processors, banks, and businesses have not switched to chip and pin like the entire rest of the world has?
Okay, so
You'll probably have to explain what chip and pin is.
sure, let's start there. Maybe that's the first thing. So for most people, if they take a look at the front of their cards, whatever payment card you have today, other than an electronic benefit transfer card that pays you for groceries or medical expenses, I mean, those cards should have a chip on them because there's a lot of fraud there, but they don't. But if you look on the front of just a MasterCard, a Visa, an American Express, you'll see a little hologram and there is a chip behind it. That's doing a couple of things. That's allowing what we would call like a cryptographic, highly secure financial transaction to take place. So when you do the little tap and go we were talking about, that's what's firing up all that. It's also providing what we would call a card present, highly like a high trustworthy transaction.
Yeah.
If you were to go to an ATM or something like that. In Europe, the market is just completely different. It's more narrow. And so they're able to kind of coalesce and do this chip and pin situation, which short answer is everybody knows what a pin is. You go to the ATM to take money out, you put a 4-digit or more code in. They're marrying that with the security of the chip that's already there to enable transactions in Europe. I can't say that it's any better. I think if anything, it's probably a pain in the patootie for consumers to do both. It's like, taking 2 different antibiotics at the same time. Maybe it's not quite necessary. When you look at the American market, though, there are so many seats at the table. I mean, everybody has a finger in the financial pie, so to speak. So somebody's making, if you've ever watched a high quality mafia movie, they always say, I want a taste. I got to have a taste of the deal. So everybody has some type of a financial interest in it. And it makes this incredible complex marketplace out there. So I think that's why we haven't seen a lot of proprietary or even unification, because there's just, there's a lot of different people out there that are competing and working in that space. For me, though, I think the one thing that the U.S. really bumbled and fumbled, particularly with the card associations, is something that we would call fallback, which is, in short order, you go to an ATM machine, you should have a chip on your card that works, that says it's you, it's your card, everything works great. When that chip is pierced, missing, or there's a fraud actor that's counterfeited a card and there's not a chip there should be no transaction, period. We are still in this world of the fallback, which means we fall back to the mag stripe on the back. And then we enable a transaction, and boo-hoo, guess what?
Yeah.
There's fraud on it later in a lot of cases. Just absurd.
It makes me wonder if I should just peel all the mag strips off the back of my cards if I can.
Yeah, maybe not. I think, that's something that's coming. I believe it is. I think it's in 2026 or close to that. MasterCard is not going to have mags on the back of cards. And for a lot of people, maybe it's been subtle, but you'll notice you don't even have a card number on the front of your card now when you get a reissue. So things are coming along. Now, we may be dead before we see a lot of the changes, but I'm optimistic for everyone's grandchildren. I think it's going to be really swell, maybe in the year 2099 or something like that.
Yeah, because that's always made me a little bit antsy when I travel. Hey, I've got this nice chip on my card, but I still have to put it through something that you could put a mag straight skimmer on that can still skim the mag strip. I'm like, I'd like, which is why, Apple Pay and Android Pay are really nice, because you don't have to deal with those things at all.
Well, and you've probably seen too, and it's a crying shame that it's allowed. If you go to well-known businesses that are out there, and they've even gone to the point of going to a printer and having a professional little insert created for the chip reader on their devices that says, "Oh no, please swipe your card."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's absurd. But it's happening. They want you to swipe versus a chip read. It's just so counterintuitive. But that's the world that we live in.
Does the chip transaction take? I know. I shouldn't say I know. I believe that merchants are now responsible for chargebacks on mag swipes, but not on pin trans. If there's fraud, it gets handled differently, whether it's a chip transaction or it's a mag stripe transaction. And I think that was the stick against merchants to stop having mag swipes. Update your terminals.
Yeah, absolutely. We spent, probably half of my career was talking about the liability shift of, how do you sort of take these handfuls of mud and push them into, an accounting column so that somebody's responsible for it. And it really kind of does come down to a lot of very complex rules that say, if you accepted a high dollar transaction and you used a mag stripe and it turns out it was a counterfeit, you are eating that cost. So, and that, as it should be, I think. It's so fascinating to me today that you can go out and spend hundreds of dollars, and not only are you not looked at in the eye or addressed by the cashier who's on their phone talking to their best girlfriend, they're not taking your ID to make sure that your card matches. No, that's not happening. You could be transacting in any number of fraudulent ways on the other side of the candy counter where they can't see you. So it's kind of ludicrous in a way, what's going on out there.
So is from your perspective, most secure to least secure for a consumer, or least risk to most risk for consumer? Least risk would be Apple Pay, Android Pay, where you're using a phone or a watch to
tap and go,
and then tap with the card.
Absolutely.
And then a chip transaction, and then mag swipe would be does anyone do imprint machines anymore?
The knuckle busters, I don't think they come out. I don't think they come out very often. I would suspect that our current workforce wouldn't even know what to do. And also, as the new cards come out, there's nothing embossed on there.
Yeah, you and I know what an imprint machine is. Probably none of the listeners know what an imprint machine is.
uh, I would say that it's probably getting less and less, to say the least. Speaking of sort of questionable habits, I had a pop up push notification from a local bank that said, there's been some kind of a security issue. But they fed through a lot of transactions that showed me, $50 authorizations, just multiples. And so I called them and I said, would it be possible if I could come in and pick up, uh, a new card? And so they offered instant issue, which was super great. And inside my triangle of the grocery store, I drop by there and get my card. But this is something that I laugh about to this day. It's a small bank. The bank has a dozen workers inside, maybe not any other customers at that point. Towards the end of the day, and I pick up my card, show my ID, and I said, oh, you know what, I really would like to have the same, I want my PIN number. I want to put a custom PIN number in, otherwise I won't remember it. And the lady's about 20 feet away from me, and she says, what's the PIN number that you want to be on there? And I was like, is this a revival of the Candid Camera show? Perhaps some of you may recall. And then I just thought, it's just one of those things. It's not mindful to a lot of people that's the last thing you would do.
Yeah.
It should have been a training video, but you have to be kind of careful.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4.
It really
like
is.
all the rest of my cards.
Sure. So fair warning to anyone listening to this podcast, don't comply with that. Require them to be a little bit more secure. It's important.
and I suppose the tip there would be anytime that you're at an ATM machine, cover the PIN pad while you're typing in your PIN code, in case there's a little camera put through.
There's always been that scenario out there. I think it makes sense. You can also, depending on your financial institution, if you want, you can queue up a cardless cash withdrawal now through your banking app. In some areas, you can do this where you queue it up inside the car while you're sitting there, and it's a barcode scan, so you don't even pull your card out. You just walk up, scan it, and it spits your money out, and off you go. So definitely there's like some safe things out there. I'd say that a lot of those areas people are somewhat cautious because we've heard the story so much. Yeah. I think what does bother me though, like in our more digital contemporary world, are just like the pitfalls that people find themselves in, and they don't know how they got there through social media and oversharing. I mean, It's a big deal. You can give away the keys to your identity universe quite easily through social media if you don't know what you're doing. And I think a lot of people do not know what they're doing. They're oversharing quite a bit, and it leads to a lot of identity fraud.
So what things should people not be sharing on social media?
Well, for one thing, and this is something that it is a major shift. I've had to do this myself on the professional website LinkedIn. Rather than documenting what you're about to do or what you're going to do in the next 2 weeks, you have to flip the table and start being kind of like a historical reporter about yourself.
Yeah.
So, I'm back from the banking conference in San Antonio, and it was really great. I'm not going there, so if you'd like to, rob my house, call up my business and pretend to me and have $50,000 wired out. Those things happen all the time. So it's kind of the oversharing part of that. I also think that if you can hide your email and your phone number from any of those platforms where people can see it, because guess what? When you go to the pharmacy, what do they ask you? What's your phone number?
Yeah.
Or what's your email? It's the keys to so many things. So you need to keep them out of prying eyes. I think that's a really important part. And the other one has to do with minors, children, grandchildren. Everybody likes to brag and show off their grandkids and their children. The thing that concerns me, though, is if you're sharing a lot of images about your kids, and maybe you're saying, Joseph Michael Buzzard was turned, 11 yesterday. Well, you've just given first, middle, last name and an image, and people can do the math on dates of birth, etc. You'd be surprised how many children have mortgages.
Oh,
So be a little bit cautious of that. I'm not saying don't brag about your kids, but maybe siphon off some of that information. And remember, bad guys are watching. They're also leveraging your contacts. So if you have friend groups that are visible, what's going to happen? And this did happen to me through someone that I knew, but in a social media context. If they see that you and I are buddies, they may send me a message and they may say, you know what, he is in jail right now. He needs some funds, the classic thing. But there's a
yeah.
new wrinkle on that as well, where they say he's in the ER. I mean, we need to get him checked out and get his meds and get him home. We need $500. People are complying with that because it's new and different. It plays on the emotions quite a bit. I actually had a dear friend of mine who worked for the Secret Service, and she was contacted, we believe, with like a deep fake voice kind of thing. And they told her that I was in a Mexican prison and needed bail money. If you've known me long enough, that's probably not ever going to happen. But also, she was so suspended in the kind of like near awfulness of that she forgot she could just call me.
Yeah.
I started getting calls from people that said, "Are you okay?"
And that's the thing that I think you and I kind of we kind of people can we can chuckle about it and say, oh gosh, what in the world. But when we're the one who gets the phone call, it's not that we're stupid, it's not that we're ill-informed, it's not that we're naive. Our brain is triggered in such a way that we're emotionally the history of human beings. It trips a part of our brain when we think somebody's in danger, and we now go into problem-solving mode as opposed to being rational and thoughtful about stuff. We act out of emotion, and that's just the way that we're wired, and the bad guys know that.
They completely take advantage of it. It's sort of like the Freudian fight or flight reaction that you have. And I think that it probably will do everybody a bit of good here to understand that, this is so important. You have to take the moment and slow it down. Pretend it's a film and you're the star inside of it, if that's what's going to get you through the moment. But when you have a complete stranger who reaches out to you, and it doesn't matter how, they call you on the phone, they send you a text message, whatever they're trying to do, their job is to kind of get you a little disturbed and upset so that you react. The low tech easy fix on that, you hang up. Just be me, because I love to hang up on people. Trust me, I've done it a lot.
That's what you were doing just before we started recording. You hung up on me. It wasn't the internet going out.
Right. Here I am. I'm friendless, poor social skills. I've hung up on way too many people. But with criminals in mind, it's okay to do that. I mean, my mother would never have done that. She would have been polite to the last moment, talking to people, and but get away from them somehow. And the other part of that we've seen in the news, there was an elderly lady that made the news, and she was so proud of herself because she had kind of trapped the fraud actor or the criminal who was trying to steal from her. But here's the bottom line. There are a lot of dangerous street gangs that have converted over to more like white-collar financial crimes because they're easier to perpetrate. They're, high volume, lucrative, seldom get arrested. That doesn't mean they're not carrying a gun.
Yeah.
So, the idea is just disengage. If you're so worried that your bank has turned your bank card off for some unknown reason, hang up the phone and drive down there.
Yeah.
Or call them on the phone and or here's a novel idea. Go use your bank card and see if it works.
Yeah.
Wow. Low tech, easy way to figure that out. But it's important.
Yeah, the scary one to me is the deep fakes, that because you and I have now done this episode, there's plenty of audio to draw off of to create a voice that sounds like one of us, that can call someone that we know, and well, it sounds like It sounds like Chris. Sounds like John. Okay,
Sure.
I guess it's reasonable. My wife and I now have we have a passcode that we would use on any
Mhm.
on any type of situation that's out of the ordinary. That if we don't use this passcode, then it's not really us calling.
Well, I think it's reasonable. And, speaking of passcodes, it's, a reasonable standard operating practice for especially utility companies. Have a passphrase put on there if you're worried or if you've had troubles. Just don't share it with anybody. Make sure it's something unique. That's sometimes the only thing that a criminal doesn't have.
Yeah,
They have your date of birth and social and everything else. But you don't want them to divert your utilities or have things changed or the worst fear of course is sending money like through peer-to-peer networks and
yeah,
things like that. It's really important to stay safe and keep things as secure as possible.
yeah. Those I'm finally more trusting of the peer to peer. I don't want to say peer to peer financial transaction apps without saying anybody by name.
Hmm. Well,
But for the longest time, it was like, nope, nope, I'm not touching this. I'm not connecting this fly by night, tech startup to
mhm.
my bank account. No way am I doing that. But.
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things there. Part of it is the operator error,
Yeah,
busy people, busy world. One of the things that I do like, as long as you're paying attention to it, is if you're going to send money to somebody and they're taking the time to, the product is showing you who you're sending the money to, you better slow down and read that. Because,
yeah,
during the COVID period, I bought some medical masks from a lady. And when I put in the send information for the small amount of money I was spending, it came up with some gentleman's name that did not match her last name or anything. And so I reached out to her and she said, "Oh, that's my husband." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." But in some cases, it may not be,
yeah,
and as the dollar amounts keep ratcheting up for these things, I mean, it's better that you wrap your mind around it and understand what they do and maybe take ownership of an account even if you don't want to use it.
yeah.
Just, as we say, claim it and just, lock it down and keep somebody else from using it.
And one of the things that I've done on some of these
Mhm.
kind of products and services is I have, gosh, I wouldn't call it a disposable bank account, but I have a bank account that I specific that never has very much money in it, that these financial transaction apps are connected to that bank, not where I do my banking on the
Mhm.
regular. So the way I've always viewed it is I've set a small limit that if something goes wrong, it's limited to that bank account that's not
Mhm.
tied into where my paycheck goes or things like that.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, you could always explore. I think that's a really good one. For some people, you might explore like a prepaid product, but buyer beware. I mean, some
Yeah,
of those fees that gobble up the balance you have to be super careful
yeah,
about it. I would be more tempted to use a prepaid product in a travel scenario, as long as it had a chip on it that could be read if you were out of country. For again, for money that you're planning on spending in the next 30 days, it kind of makes more sense to do that. But it's like everyone who has sort of like a frivolous email address
yeah.
for all the junk mail, and then you have like a better email address. You know, makes sense to have something like that. So I think that's all good. Whatever gets you through the
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up here, any last thoughts of kind of the one or two more? Don't forget to do this. It might save your finances.
well, I think sure. I think the one thing that pops out to me is from a resolution standpoint. So let's just say that you have found yourself on the tip of the sword, and you've been victimized by someone, whether you know them or not. It really doesn't make any difference. When you go to your financial services provider, or to a retailer, of course, you can go with a similar complaint. But the theme where I'm working towards is if you have a U.S. financial institution or a lender, and you're reporting that you have been the victim of a financial crime, and you may call it a scam or whatever the case may be, as a consumer, you do have rights. One of them, pretty much right off the bat, I'll tell you, is don't accept no as the answer to your request for funds restitution. In many cases, unless it's proven that you are the perpetrator of, sometimes people call it friendly fraud. Yeah, you deserve to not have your fraud claim paid if you tried to cheat your bank. But if you didn't do that, there are things that you can do. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, oversees banks, credit unions, and lenders. If you feel that you've been denied in some way, it's worth possibly exploring a complaint. That particular agency, they receive about 25,000 complaints a week.
Wow.
Of course, not all of those are probably legitimate, but here's what I would do if I were trying to resolve a matter like this. I would be 100% transparent with the company that I'm dealing with. Let's reframe this and remember, I'm the victim here. I'm going to give you one chance to resolve this, and I am absolutely 100% filing a complaint with the CFPB, and I'm going to do it by Friday if I don't hear from you. So make it clear what your intentions are, and explore it in that way. And I think it'll change the conversation a little bit. Not necessarily in your favor, but just remember, you probably have rights that you're not aware of.
It's don't accept the first no that
Don't accept
anyone
the
tells you
first
in
no.
life.
Sure,
Well,
and
I
take
guess I
some
shouldn't say that,
advice.
but yeah.
Yeah, but also take some advice from these folks. They are great counselors. How can I be safer? What can we do so that this will never happen again? There are a lot of things. You know, for heaven's sakes, there are plenty of people right now that purchased McAfee 10 years ago and they haven't updated and paid for updates. They think
Yeah.
that 10-year-old model on their computers keeps them safe from malware, and it isn't. So, it's a buyer beware and be aware world. So just, keep your eyes peeled and, you know, be positive and proactive. I think that's really the message there, but be persistent as well.
And be your own advocate. Don't wait for them to
Absolutely.
advocate for you.
Absolutely.
John, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. If people want to be able to connect with you, how can they find you?
Oh, you can come to LinkedIn and connect with me. It's always nice to kind of converse with people and receive feedback from these kinds of experiences that we do. I think you probably would agree, it's kind of nice whenever people say, oh, I really got a couple of good tips there. So don't be shy. Come and connect and we'll take it from there.
We love it. We love it when people say thank you. And
Yes,
I
we
learned
do.
something.
That's very rewarding in our world. That's why we're here. That's why we do
That
this.
it is. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you very much.